Ever heard of Mary MacLane?
No.
Well, get ready, because today we're diving deep into the life and work of this, uh, what should we even call her?
A forgotten literary rock star.
Yeah, it's got a nice ring to it.
We're talking turn-of-the-century Montana, scandalous memoirs, and a woman who just, well, she really didn't care what anyone thought.
What makes MacLane so fascinating, I think, is that she comes onto the scene at such a pivotal moment, right? The Victorian era is gasping its last breath. Women are starting to advocate for more freedom, a voice of their own.
But MacLane, she's not just asking politely for a seat at the table, is she?
Oh, absolutely not.
It's more like she's kicking down the door, grabbing the microphone, and announcing to the world, hey, I'm here, deal with it.
Exactly. And the world listened, They called her the Wild Woman of Butte.
Catchy, right.
It really is.
But it wasn't just hype, was it? This was a woman who poured her deepest desires, her frustrations, everything into her diaries. And then she had the audacity to publish them.
And these weren't your grandma's tea party diaries. This was raw, unfiltered self-expression.
Yeah.
The kind of stuff that made people blush back then.
Probably still makes some people blush.
You're not wrong.
So that's what we're grappling with today, right? Was she just incredibly savvy, a master of self-promotion, basically the original influencer way before the internet?
It's tempting to think so.
Right.
But there's this other layer, this raw talent simmering beneath all the scandal. The more you read her, the more you start to wonder, was she actually a literary genius? Completely overlooked because she dared to challenge every rule in the book.
Okay, so let's break this down then. To really understand Mary MacLane, we need to first understand where she came from.
Okay.
And let's be honest, when you think literary inspiration, Butte, Montana, at the turn of the century, doesn't exactly scream Virginia Woolf, does it?
Not quite. You're picturing saloons because Butte, that's what it was. This rough and tumble mining town. People from all over chasing that American dream, or at least a big old vein of copper. Not exactly known for its book clubs.
So how did this place, this wild west of ambition and dust, shape a young woman who, according to everything we've read, devoured books like they were going out of style?
It's the heart of the matter, isn't it? See, Butte was all about contrast. You had this booming industry, this sense of possibility that drew people in, but it was still a small town, very much stuck in its ways, especially when it came to women.
Especially when it came to women, yeah.
And you can imagine how restricting, how stifling that must have been for someone like MacLane. Someone who, even as a young girl, was already chafing against the confines of her world.
She wanted something more.
Oh, she definitely did.
And it seems like that yearning is everywhere.
It really is. It's like this constant thread throughout her life. Her dad, he was a prominent figure in Butte, died when she was young. Her mom remarried, which, well, let's just say that definitely left its mark on MacLane. Judging by her writing, it's like this undercurrent, this yearning for something bigger, something beyond the life she was expected to lead.
And that yearning, that need for something more, it basically explodes onto the page with her first book.
It really is.
1902. She's barely 20 years old, and boom, she drops this literary hand grenade called, get this, The Story of Mary MacLane.
Talk about a title that lets you know exactly what you're in for.
Right. No beating around the bush with this one. This wasn't some polite memoir about, the weather and what everyone wore to church on Sunday.
Definitely not.
This was raw, unflinching, like holding up a mirror to all the things society told women they weren't supposed to even think about, let alone announce to the world.
And she just puts it all out there. I mean, imagine opening a book and reading lines like, I have in me a quite unusual intensity of life.
Oh, I love that line.
Right. Or, I am a genius.
Bold move, Mary.
And she knew it. She even writes, I am quite odd. And this is 1902, right? Women were supposed to be seen and not heard, definitely not writing about their inner genius for the whole world to see.
It's like she dared people to look away, to say, oh, she's just being dramatic. But they couldn't. That rawness, that honesty, it was too powerful to ignore. It was like a train wreck you couldn't help but watch.
Exactly. And for young women especially, women who felt trapped by those same expectations, it was like this lifeline. Here was someone saying, it's okay to be different. It's okay to want more.
And to be loud about it.
Exactly. But it's important to remember that she wasn't writing in a vacuum. MacLane. She was a reader, like a serious bookworm. And you could see the influences of other literary rebels, women who dared to break the mold, woven into her own work.
One name we kept bumping into during our research was Marie Bashkirtseff.
Oh, absolutely.
Russian diarist, artist. She also left behind these incredibly intense personal journals. What do you think it was about Bashkirtseff that resonated so strongly with MacLane?
I think MacLane saw a kindred spirit in Bashkirtseff, someone who understood that burning need to express herself authentically on her own terms.
Even if it meant shaking things up a bit?
Oh, especially if it meant shaking things up.
Yeah.
But, and this is crucial, MacLane wasn't content to just follow in anyone's footsteps.
She wanted to blaze her own trail.
Exactly. She even writes, and I'm paraphrasing here, that her work had a stronger individuality than Bashkirtseff's. So she's aware of the influence, but she's also staking her claim as something new, something different.
And it wasn't just Bashkirtseff. I mean, she read everything. We're talking Charlotte Bronte, George Eliot, even those gritty American realists like Trowbridge.
Her literary diet was all over the place, which I think speaks to her complexity.
Right. It complicates that image of her as this self-obsessed, wild woman.
Totally. And that's what makes her so interesting to unpack.
Right.
Because, yes, there's ego there, for sure. I mean, she basically invented the selfie a century early.
Right.
But there's also this incredibly sharp social commentary woven through her work. It's like she's taking everything she's experiencing as a woman in that time and shoving it right back in society's face, saying, look at this. Look what you've created.
And nowhere is that more apparent than in her exploration of female sexuality and desire.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where she really starts to make people uncomfortable. Even today, those passages can be,
A little spicy.
to say the least. But it's not just about being provocative. When she writes, I long to cultivate my element of badness, she's challenging the very definition of what it meant to be a good woman in that era.
And those expectations were pretty narrow.
Incredibly narrow. But she refused to be limited by them. I mean, her relationship with Fanny
Well,
Corbin,
we're going to get to her.
talk about pushing boundaries. This wasn't just a simple friendship. There was a depth of emotion, a complexity there that even today would make some people raise an eyebrow.
And remember, this is a time when any kind of intimacy between women was viewed with suspicion.
Exactly. So for her to write about it so openly, so honestly, it was a radical act.
And speaking of radical acts, we can't talk about MacLane without addressing well, let's call him the elephant in the room.
Or maybe the devil in the room.
Touché. Because that fascination with the devil, that wasn't just a marketing ploy, was it? It was so much deeper than that.
Oh, absolutely. Remember how we talked about her yearning for something bigger than Butte? Well, for MacLane, the devil, he represented that. He was this force, this idea that could shatter the confines of her world. He was freedom, rebellion, everything she wasn't supposed to be.
It's like she says, to the devil of the steel gray eyes, who one day may come, who knows, I dedicate, with the mad love of a young, weary wooden heart, this, my book.
I mean, come on, that's powerful stuff.
It really is.
And it gets to the heart of who she was. She wasn't content to just exist within the lines. She wanted to color outside of them, to embrace the darkness, the complexity.
To dance with the devil, so to speak.
Exactly.
It's kind of sad, though, when you think about it.
What's that?
You have this woman, this absolute force of nature, who craved the spotlight, who built a career on being brutally honest. And yet, it's like the world just moved on.
It's a tale as old as time, isn't it? The world loves a rebel, but only until that rebellion stops being entertaining.
Until there's a new scandal to grab their attention.
Exactly. And suddenly, that honesty that was so refreshing, it becomes inconvenient.
Or even threatening.
Right. It's like, okay, we've had our fun, but now you're making us uncomfortable.
So what happens then to those voices, the ones who dared to speak too soon, who refused to play by the rules?
That is the question, isn't it? And it's not always a satisfying answer. In MacLane's case, I think it was a combination of things. Tastes changed, society moved on. But there's also an argument to be made that her work and the work of other women like her was deliberately sidelined.
Erased because it was too dangerous, too disruptive.
It's not impossible. They challenge the status quo, and sometimes the status quo bites back.
So she became this forgotten figure, her work gathering dust in some archive, waiting to be rediscovered.
For a while, yeah. But here's the thing about art, about writing especially. It has this way of finding its audience, even if it takes a few decades.
Or in MacLane's case, a few, more than a few.
True. But starting in the 1970s, you see this resurgence of interest in her work. Feminist scholars, they recognized her as the trailblazer she was.
Someone who'd been saying the things they were just starting to fight for.
Exactly. And suddenly, she wasn't this forgotten relic of a bygone era. She was relevant again.
A voice from the past speaking directly to the present.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes her so fascinating to consider even today. I mean, here we are in the age of social media where everyone's crafting this perfect image of themselves online.
And filtering the heck out of everything.
Right. And then you have MacLane, who is the opposite of that. Raw, unfiltered, unapologetic.
It's refreshing, isn't it?
It really is. She reminds us that it's okay to be messy, to be flawed, to want things that society tells you shouldn't.
To embrace your inner badness.
Exactly.
I have a feeling she'd be a blast at parties.
I think you're right about that.
But in all seriousness, what can we, in the 21st century, really take away from the life and work of Mary MacLane?
I think her story reminds us that the fight for self-expression, for the freedom to be who you are, it's timeless.
It's universal.
Exactly. She challenged the rules, she embraced her individuality, and in doing so, she paved the way for countless others to do the same.
And that's a legacy worth celebrating, even if it took a while for the world to catch up.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, folks, there you have it. Our deep dive into the life and work of Mary MacLane, the wild woman of Butte, comes to an end. Hopefully, we've given you a taste of what made her so fascinating, so controversial, and ultimately so important.
And who knows, maybe you'll be inspired to track down her work and decide for yourself.
That's what we like to hear. Keep those minds curious, everyone, and we'll see you at our next deep dive.